In 2010, everyone believed China had already won the game. The numbers seemed insurmountable. China controlled 28% of global manufacturing. It had built 800 new cities in 30 years. Its workforce was the largest and cheapest in history. Its government moved with military precision, making decisions that would take democracies years to implement. The assumption was locked in. China would dominate the 21st century the way America dominated the 20th. But this assumption, like most assumptions about permanent power, was built on a misunderstanding of how systems actually change. The conditions that created China's dominance were already disappearing, and by 2026, they have largely vanished. And what's happening now isn't China's continued rise. It's India's inevitable acceleration into a position China will struggle to defend. This isn't ideology or wishful thinking. This is mathematics, working itself out in real time across supply chains, labor forces, demographic pyramids, and geopolitical calculations that corporations and governments can no longer ignore. The timeline is clearer now than it's ever been. By 2030, India will become the world's second largest manufacturing economy. No longer a possibility, but a trajectory already in motion. By 2035, India's manufacturing output will equal China's in absolute terms. By 2040, India will likely surpass China. But the more significant shift isn't the ranking change. It's that India won't just replace China as the factory of the world. India will create a manufacturing system that works fundamentally differently for different reasons, serving different global needs. And this transformation is happening because of forces neither country can fully control. Start with the core issue that nobody wants to admit about China. China's workforce is vanishing. This isn't metaphorical. In 2023, China's working age population, people between 15 and 65 years old, stood at 827 million. By 2026, that number had fallen to approximately 815 million. By 2030, it will drop below 800 million. By 2050, China's working age population will be smaller than it was in 1990. This isn't a gradual decline. It's systematic, irreversible collapse happening at a pace that has no historical precedent in modern economics. When manufacturing shifted from America to China in the 1990s, China had a structural advantage that seemed permanent. It had 4 times more working-age people than most developed nations. Unlimited labor meant infinite scaling possibilities. Factories could expand endlessly. Wages would stay low forever. That was the assumption. That assumption is dead. China's population peaked at 1.4 billion people in 2022. Since then, it has contracted. Every year, China loses population. Every year, the average age of Chinese people rises. The government tried everything. It ended one-child policies. It allowed 3-child families. It offered incentives for births. None of it worked. Women in China have decided to have fewer children because they see the cost of education, the difficulty of finding employment, the competition for resources, and they're choosing careers, stability, and independence instead. This choice is economically rational. It's also economically catastrophic for a nation built on having more workers than competitors. India faces the opposite reality. India's working-age population is still growing. It will grow for another 15 years. India will have 1 billion working-age people by 2030. By 2040, India's population will peak at approximately 1.7 billion, then slowly decline. But that decline will happen slowly over decades, while India spends 30 years, the crucial 30 years, with an absolute workforce advantage. This isn't an accident of nature. It's timing, pure timing. China got old while trying to industrialize. India is industrializing while still young. The demographic window for India is open now. In 15 years, it will start closing. In 25 years, it will be mostly closed. This explains why every major multinational on Earth is making the same calculation right now. Move to India while the labor advantage exists, before that advantage disappears like it did in China. But demographics alone don't explain why India is winning. If it were just about numbers, Vietnam or Bangladesh would be the answer. They have young populations and low wages, yet every major manufacturer is choosing India over every other option. The reason is that India has something Vietnam and Bangladesh don't have: a domestic market of 1.4 billion consumers, growing middle class, and government beginning to stabilize around infrastructure investment instead of pure extraction. When you manufacture in Vietnam, you're exporting everything. Your success depends entirely on global demand staying high and shipping costs staying low. When you manufacture in India, you're manufacturing for India too. You're building a supply chain that works locally and globally. That's a different risk profile. That's a different long-term story. China understood this advantage decades ago. China didn't become the world's factory just because of cheap labor. China became the world's factory because China built a complete ecosystem. Raw material suppliers, component manufacturers, logistics infrastructure, ports, highways, electrical grids, workforce training systems, and a government that prioritized making this work above all else. This infrastructure took 30 years to build. It's not replicable overnight. But India is building something similar, and it's doing it faster because the knowledge already exists. Companies don't need to figure out how to organize supply chains from scratch. They know what works. They just need to transplant it to India and scale it. And they're doing exactly that. Apple is considering moving 25% of iPhone production to India by 2028. That alone represents $50 to $60 billion in annual manufacturing value moving from China to India in 4 years. Foxconn, the world's largest electronics manufacturer, has opened 15 new factories in India in the last 18 months. Samsung, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, they're all building manufacturing presence in India now. These aren't tentative experiments. These are strategic commitments. The decisions have been made. The money has been allocated. The movement is already happening. By 2027, manufacturing jobs moving from China to India will accelerate into a self-reinforcing cycle. More manufacturers attract more suppliers. More suppliers attract more infrastructure investment. More infrastructure investment makes India more attractive to the next wave of manufacturers. This is how dominance shifts. Not through military conquest or political revolution, but through the quiet mathematics of comparative advantage and long-term risk assessment. China's response to this shift has been to try to reinvent its economy away from manufacturing. The government is investing massively in semiconductors, artificial intelligence, green technology, advanced manufacturing, and high-value sectors where labor costs matter less. This is actually the correct strategic response. The problem is that China is trying to do this while its young population evaporates. In 2024, China produced 11.3 million college graduates. That's an extraordinary number. But there were only 8 to 9 million new job openings annually in China's growing sectors. So 2 to 3 million educated young people enter the job market every year with no clear path forward. What happens to them? Many leave. In 2024, approximately 1.4 million Chinese citizens applied for work visas internationally. These aren't retirees or elderly people emigrating for family reasons. These are young, educated Chinese people fleeing limited opportunity in their own country. China is experiencing a brain drain at the exact moment it needs to be holding talent and innovation. India's situation is inverted. India produces 7 million college graduates annually. There are 15 to 18 million new job openings every year. Young Indians are desperate for opportunity. They're not leaving. They're staying and fighting for positions in expanding industries. The psychological difference between these two situations is enormous. In China, talented young people are starting to think about life outside China. In India, talented young people are thinking about how to climb the ladder within India. One dynamic attracts investment and talent. The other repels it. Over time, this compounds. The gap between China's available talent pool and India's available talent pool will only widen. There's another dimension to this shift that gets less attention, but matters immensely. Governance, flexibility. China's government can move fast. It can make decisions that would paralyze democracies. It can redirect entire industries with a single command. Now, for the first 20 years of manufacturing dominance, this flexibility was a massive advantage. But it's also created a vulnerability. Chinese policy can shift without warning. A sector thriving one year can be restricted the next. This happened to Chinese tech companies. It happened to the property market. It happened to education. Entrepreneurs and investors learned to be nervous. When you invest $2 billion in a factory, you need predictability. You need to know that the government won't suddenly change course and make your investment worthless. China used to offer that certainty. Now it doesn't. India's democracy is messy and slow, but it's predictable. Laws take time to pass. Regulations are transparent. Businesses know the rules and can trust they won't change overnight. For a corporation deciding where to spend $10 billion on new manufacturing capacity, India's stability is starting to look more valuable than China's speed. The risk calculations have shifted. This is another quiet but massive factor driving the transition from China to India. The global geopolitical context is accelerating everything. China and America are locked in a strategic competition that has turned manufacturing location into a national security issue. America is trying to reduce dependence on China. The European Union is trying to reduce dependence on China. Even countries that are historically neutral are trying to reduce dependence on China. At the same time, India is positioning itself as an alternative that's not hostile to the West, not locked in a superpower confrontation, and strategically aligned with countries trying to build supply chains away from China. India is playing this perfectly. It's joining alliances like Quad that include America, Japan, and Australia. It's positioning itself as the democratic alternative to China. It's building relationships with the West while maintaining pragmatic relations with Russia and other non-aligned nations. From a corporate perspective, manufacturing in India makes geopolitical sense, not just economic sense. You're not taking sides in a confrontation. You're building resilience. You're diversifying risk. This geopolitical dimension is driving the transition forward faster than pure economics would alone. Inside India itself, the government has recognized this moment and is making specific investments to capture it. The Prime Minister launched Make in India nearly a decade ago. At the time, it seemed like wishful thinking. Now it's becoming reality because the conditions align. The government is investing in ports, highways, electrical grids, and industrial parks. It's streamlining regulations to make it easier to start businesses. It's negotiating trade agreements that position India as an attractive manufacturing hub. These investments would take time to pay off under normal circumstances. But they're paying off now because multinational companies have already made the strategic decision to move away from China. India's infrastructure improvements are landing at exactly the right moment. They're not pulling companies to India, they're removing obstacles for companies that have already decided to go there. This alignment of corporate strategy and government investment is the final ingredient that makes the transition inevitable. The timeline for when India actually overtakes China is worth being specific about. By 2027, India will clearly be the second largest manufacturing economy globally by growth rate. By 2028, India will capture more new manufacturing capacity than any other country. By 2030, India's manufacturing output will reach approximately 12 to 13% of global manufacturing, up from current levels around 2 to 3%. China will still be larger in absolute terms by 2030, but the gap will be visibly closing. By 2032, India will likely surpass China's manufacturing workforce, not because China's grows, but because China's continues shrinking while India's continues growing. By 2035, India's manufacturing output in absolute terms will likely equal China's. By 2040, India will probably exceed China's manufacturing capacity. This timeline assumes no major catastrophe or policy reversal in either country. It's not prediction, it's trajectory observation. These trends are already locked in by demographics alone. Everything else either accelerates or slightly delays this predetermined path. But the path itself is set. What makes this transition historically significant isn't just the ranking change. It's what it represents about how global power actually shifts. People imagined great power transitions happen through wars, revolutions, or dramatic confrontations. Most of them don't. They happen through one country slowly accumulating structural advantages while another country slowly loses them. China didn't defeat America militarily to become the world's factory. America's manufacturing base gradually became too expensive for low-margin products, so companies moved to where labor was cheaper. China benefited from this economic logic, not from military dominance. India is benefiting from the same logic now. The same forces that made China attractive are making India attractive. The same forces that made China expensive are making China less attractive. This is how systems change, quietly, through millions of individual corporate decisions, through demographic trends nobody can reverse, through the mathematics of economics working itself out, regardless of what governments want or prefer. The consequences of this shift extend far beyond manufacturing rankings. When India becomes the world's factory, India becomes more important geopolitically. Countries that depend on Indian supply chains become allies by necessity. India's currency becomes more important. India's voice in international negotiations gains weight. India's growth becomes a driving force for global economics rather than a regional story. Within India itself, this shift will mean millions of jobs, rising wages, expanded middle class, and the ability to invest in education and infrastructure at scales currently impossible. But it will also mean inequality, urbanization pressure, environmental stress, and all the challenges that come with rapid industrialization. For China, this shift means the easy growth era ends. China will need to transition to a high-value, innovation-based economy while its workforce shrinks and ages. This is hard. Japan, South Korea, and other developed nations went through this transition slowly over decades. China will need to do it fast, with 1.4 billion people, and with limited time before the demographic window closes entirely. Some Chinese sectors will succeed in this transition, others won't. Overall, China faces a difficult 20 to 30 years of economic adjustment and slow growth compared to its spectacular 40-year rise. For the world, this shift means diversification. The risk of having all global manufacturing dependent on one country, one government, one political system will decrease. Supply chains will spread across multiple nations. This is generally healthier for global stability. It's also more expensive in the short term. Moving manufacturing from China to India won't be seamless. Some products will cost more. Some supply chains will be disrupted. But long-term, having resilient, diversified supply chains is better than being completely dependent on one nation, even if that nation is currently stable. The transition will be messy. But the direction is clear. India's rise as the world's manufacturing center isn't coming. It's already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. The companies know it. The governments know it. The only people who seem surprised are those still expecting yesterday's world to remain unchanged. But the world doesn't work that way. Systems shift, power moves, advantages disappear, new ones emerge. This is happening now, in real time, and by 2035, looking back at 2026, it will be obvious that we watched the moment China's 40-year dominance became India's emerging opportunity. The question isn't whether this transition will happen. The question is what it means for your own life, your investments, your career, and your understanding of how global power actually works. What do you think about this analysis? Do you agree that India is positioned to overtake China? What factors do you believe will matter most in determining whether this timeline holds or accelerates? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss what this shift means.